Why was everyone so certain she was invisible? That question gnawed at Alina Cross as the casings clinked like broken bells into the bucket at her knees. The Nevada sun burned hot enough to warp the horizon, heat shimmering above the firing range at Ravenwood. To anyone passing by, she was nobody, just another worker sweeping brass, pushing order into the chaos left by real soldiers. Background noise. Disposable. She didn't mind the sweat trickling down her temples. She didn't mind the ache in her back or the scorch of sand creeping into her boots. What she minded was the way eyes skipped over her, as if presence without rank made her less than human. Behind her, the sniper unit was packing up. They moved with casual pride, cradling rifles that cost more than her yearly pay, checking optics and suppressors as though touching something holy. Master Sergeant Cole Briggs's voice carried above the wind, sharp and theatrical, the way men performed when they were sure the world was watching. "This," he said, raising a Barrett MR-80 chambered in .375 Che tac, "isn't just a rifle, it's a surgical instrument. At 1,500 meters it doesn't hit, it erases." The young snipers ringed around him nodded, wide-eyed. He stroked the rifle's stock like a man showing off a sports car. "Don't get ideas, years of training, iron nerves, natural talent, that's what separates us from everyone else." They hung on every word. She paused mid-reach for another casing, her fingers brushing brass still hot from sun and gunfire. She had heard this kind of sermon before: the pride, the reverence, the certainty. What Briggs didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had grown up on Black Ridge Plateau, Arizona. Out there, long shots weren't speeches, they were supper. Her Uncle Victor Locke taught her to read the wind before she learned to drive. Coyotes at 1,200 meters, the sharp silhouette of a jackrabbit half a canyon away. He didn't tell her rifles erased. He told her rifles answered. They spoke in physics, in patience, in silence. Briggs kept going. The longest confirmed kill on record, 3,540 meters, over 2 miles, bullet in the air nearly 7 seconds. You think you can just close your eyes and get lucky at that distance? Forget it. That's not shooting, that's science. A private whistled low. "You ever go near that, Sarge?" Briggs grinned. "My personal best, 1,800, beyond 2,000, luck, nothing more, don't let anyone tell you different." His laugh rippled across the firing line, arrogant and final. Alina clenched her jaw and remembered her uncle's words. The rifle doesn't care who holds it. The bullet only listens to physics. She wanted to believe she could keep that thought buried, hidden. She wanted to stay a shadow in their world. But arrogance has a way of sniffing out silence, of demanding it break. Briggs's gaze flicked across the line, then landed on her crouched form. His voice sharpened. "What about you, Cross?" The clatter of casing stilled. Every head turned. "You've been sneaking peeks at our sessions. Ever fired anything bigger than a 9mm service pistol?" The smirk spread like fire through dry brush. Laughter simmered on the edge, waiting to ignite. Alina rose slowly, dust streaking her faded uniform. Her eyes met Briggs's, calm, unblinking. "I've done some shooting, Master Sergeant." He echoed her words with a smirk. "Some shooting, huh?" His audience erupted. Corporal Harris leaned in, grinning. "Hey, Alina, want to try some real shooting? I'll bet you couldn't hit a barn door at 500. Laughter ricocheted across the line. Each chuckle was a cut, a reminder of where they thought she belonged. "Leave her alone," Specialist Armand muttered, the squad's marksman, conscience heavy in his voice. "She's just doing her job." But Briggs smelled blood. "No, no, Harris has a point." He paced like a performer savoring his stage. "We're always telling the rookies anyone can learn to shoot, right? Well, here's someone eager. Maybe she deserves a demonstration." She crouched again, trying to bury the sting. She hoped it would die in the dust, but Briggs never let a moment go. "Tell you what." He let silence hang, the setup before the punchline. "I'll set a target at 1,000 meters. Child's play for a trained sniper. You get one shot. Hit anywhere on the plate and I'll put your name forward for sniper school. Miss, and maybe stick to cleaning up after the real soldiers." The laughter grew sharp, ugly now, circling like jackals. Her face burned, but her expression never cracked. "I appreciate the offer, Master Sergeant," she said evenly, "but I have duties to finish." "Don't be shy," Harris pushed. "It's just for fun." But Briggs's eyes gleamed darker. He wasn't chasing fun. He wanted spectacle. He wanted humiliation. "Actually," he said, turning toward the horizon, "let's make it interesting." He swept the scope across the desert until he fixed on a jagged ridge 4 kilometers away. "See Iron Veil Ridge out there, nearly 4,000 meters. Cross, you hit that target and I'll eat my words. Hell, I'll write your commendation myself." The laughter faltered. Even Harris shifted uneasily. "Sir, that's extreme long-range competition distance," Armand said quietly. "Nobody here's trained for that." Briggs waved him off. "Relax. I don't expect her to hit it. That's the point. She'll miss by 50 meters and finally understand the difference between us and her." The desert air seemed to hold its breath. Elena's hands stilled. Then, without a word, she set the bucket of brass aside and walked toward the rifles. The unit's murmurs dropped into stunned silence. "What rifle would I be using?" she asked. Briggs blinked. He hadn't expected her to step forward. "My Barrett MRAD .375 Che TAC, though at 4,000 meters, even that's underpowered. Ideally, you'd want a 50. She nodded. Her voice cut clean through the dry air. "What's the ballistic coefficient of your ammunition?" The laughter died. For the first time, Briggs looked out of place. 670, he muttered. 300 grain Sierra Match King, muzzle velocity 2650. She tilted her head, numbers slotting into place in her mind like gears meshing. "Closer to 2700 with this barrel," she corrected softly. Briggs frowned, suddenly uneasy. "Why?" "Just trying to understand the setup." Her tone was calm, clinical. Before anyone could laugh, she bent low, testing the breeze with a wet finger. Flags wavered in the Nevada wind. She pulled a battered ballistic PDA from her pocket, screen cracked but alive, and began keying in data. Distance, altitude, temperature, humidity, wind speed, direction. Numbers spilled across the display. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably. "Where'd you learn that?" Briggs asked, suspicion under his words. She The other half belonged to her uncle Knights crouched on Black Ridge, seeing the wind, not just feeling it. Briggs turned back to his spotting scope, as though hiding his unease. Through magnification, the target was a speck, a dot of orange on stone nearly 2.5 miles away. "All right, Cross," he said, voice strained but steady. "This is your show, but when you miss, and you will, remember why science matters, why years of training matter. Why not everyone can do what we do." She stepped toward the Barrett, sleek and uncompromising on its mount. She checked the zero, studied the shimmer of mirage at 500 meters, noted each flag. "Wind steady at 4 here," she murmured, "but it won't hold that across 2 miles." Her notebook opened, stained from years of use. Numbers scrawled in pencil, tables cross-checked against the PDA solution. Bullet flight over 7 seconds, drop 48 feet, drift nearly 10 meters left depending on mid-range crosswinds. Briggs's jaw slackened. These weren't guesses, they were calculations. 34 MOA, she whispered, twisting the elevation turret. Windage click by click until it settled. "She's bluffing," Harris muttered. But Armand's eyes narrowed. "No, she knows exactly what she's doing." And now, every gaze fixed on the woman who had been invisible an hour ago. What does silence feel like when the world is waiting for you to fail? Elena lowered herself behind the Barrett MRAD, the desert dust crunching faintly beneath her knees. The rifle sat heavy on its bipod, a machine made for precision and violence, a weapon that had passed through hands more decorated than hers. Yet in this moment, It felt as though the steel and carbon fiber had been waiting for her alone. The soldiers shifted behind her. Some folded their arms, smirking still. Others grew restless, unsettled by the way she moved, not clumsy, not hesitant, but with the focus of someone who belonged here. Her cheek settled into the stock. Her shoulder absorbed the weight. She tested her natural point of aim, bones carrying the rifle's mass instead of muscles. That was the secret her uncle drilled into her: trust the skeleton, not the strain. A rifle wasn't a thing you forced into alignment. It was a thing you fell into until the crosshairs floated like they belonged to your heartbeat. The desert stretched endless ahead, shimmering heat bending the horizon. Through the scope, Iron Veil Ridge was nothing but a pinprick of orange paint against gray stone. At this distance, the world wavered like water. "She's staring at haze," Harris muttered, but his voice had lost its edge, his confidence fraying. Alina inhaled, exhaled, and then stilled. No tension, no waste, breathing steady, she whispered almost to herself. Every flag across the line bent in rhythm. 4 miles of desert wind had a pattern, but it was a pattern only patience revealed. She waited, counting seconds, reading the mirage ripple by ripple. The silence stretched long enough that even Briggs stopped smirking. Armand leaned forward slightly, murmuring, "She's waiting for a window." The moment arrived, sudden, fleeting. The mirage steadied, the flag slackened, the desert's breath paused. "Now!" Her finger slipped into the trigger's sweet spot, pressure building with calm inevitability. No jerk, no hesitation, just the slow, deliberate squeeze of someone who had done this 1,000 times in shadows no one else had cared to see. The rifle cracked, thunder rolling across the range. Recoil slammed her shoulder. Dust kicked along the line. And then the waiting. 7 seconds is nothing in the rhythm of life. A blink, a pause in conversation. But 7 seconds in the air, 7 seconds of silence stretched by expectation and doubt, it was eternity. The soldiers leaned forward unconsciously, as though their eyes could shrink the desert. Briggs hunched over his spotting scope, knuckles white, breath trapped in his chest. "Nothing," Harris blurted. "She missed." "Wait," Briggs's voice cut sharp, though his own heart was hammering. Second after second dragged. The desert air shimmered. The bullet was still flying. And then, faint, delayed by distance, the sound rolled back. A crack against stone. Armand's breath caught. Impact. But where? Briggs's hands trembled as he adjusted focus, scope tightening on the far ridge. His mouth went dry. The orange paint on the steel plate was fractured, ruptured dead center. For a long moment, words failed him. His certainty, his arrogance, every lecture he had delivered about limits, shattered in one impossible shot. "Dead center," he whispered, voice almost breaking. "She hit dead center." The range froze. No laughter, no smirks. The silence was heavier than any insult had been. Alina rose slowly, dusting her hands, calm as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To her, it hadn't been magic. It hadn't been luck. It was simply what physics and patience demanded, given respect. "Besides," she said quietly, her voice steady but edged with something unyielding, "I figured actions would speak louder than words when the right moment came." Her words weren't sharp. They weren't angry. But they carried weight, heavier than the recoil of the Barrett, heavier than the silence pressing down on every soldier present. Briggs still clung to the scope, shaking his head as though denial could rewrite what had just unfolded. His pride, his lectures, the invisible line he'd drawn between soldiers and cleaners, all of it lay broken on that ridge. A woman they had ignored had just rewritten the range itself. He lowered the scope at last, his face pale. His voice, stripped of arrogance, barely held steady. "Cross, I owe you an apology. Several, actually." She looked at him unflinching. "It's fine, Master Sergeant. I understand why you made assumptions." "No," Briggs shook his head, something raw in his tone. "It's not fine. We're supposed to be professionals, and professionals recognize talent no matter where it hides. His mouth twitched, caught between shame and something like admiration. Though I have to ask, how long have you been waiting to drop this on us? Her lips curved faintly, the closest thing to a smile. I wasn't waiting, you just gave me the challenge. Behind them, soldiers shifted, restless, uncertain how to bridge the gap between laughter and reverence. The cleaner they had dismissed had just done what most of them wouldn't dare attempt. Word would spread. It always did. But in this fragile silence, respect had already begun to take root. The bucket of casing she had set aside still sat in the dust. Forgotten. Ordinary. A reminder that extraordinary moments often begin when no one is looking. The desert wind picked up again, flags stirring. Time moved forward, but the weight of what had happened lingered. Because sometimes the greatest noise comes not from thunder, but from silence that follows. What changes faster, a reputation or the silence after it breaks? Word of Alina's shot spread across Ravenwood before the dust had settled on the firing line. A story that had begun as laughter carried now as whispers, then arguments, then disbelief. Within hours, the woman who had been overlooked for months had become a question no one could answer. She walked back toward the barracks that evening under the same desert sun, her shadow long on the gravel. Soldiers who had never looked at her before now stared openly, murmuring, asking each other details she hadn't offered. Was it a fluke? Was Briggs exaggerating? Could anyone even hit a target at nearly 4,000 meters with that rifle? Every corner she turned seemed to hold pairs of eyes that trailed her. Not cruel, not dismissive, but different, curious, searching. She hated it. For so long she had preferred silence, the freedom of being unseen, of moving through Ravenwood as if she belonged to no one and owed nothing. That invisibility had been armor, even when it stung. Now, stripped of it, she felt naked in ways no uniform could shield. At chow that night, tables fell quiet when she entered. A tray clattered louder than it should have. She sat alone as usual, but the solitude was crowded now, heavy with questions no one had the nerve to ask. Her fork scraped against tin, the sound harsh in her ears. She remembered her uncle's voice. The moment people see what you can do, they stop seeing who you are. Decide early which you value more. She wasn't sure she had decided. The following morning, Briggs came to find her. His voice lacked its old performance. "Cross, walk with me." She followed him along the edge of the range. The Nevada wind carried grit against their boots, the flags snapping as though eager to remind her of yesterday's rhythm. "I put in the commendation," Briggs said finally. "Not because of the wager, because it's the right thing. The paperwork's already in motion for sniper school." She said nothing, only watching the horizon shift in waves of heat. "You don't look happy," he pressed. She shrugged. "Recognition isn't what I was after." He studied her profile, the way she kept her expression flat. "Then why step up? You could have stayed in the background." Her answer was quiet but carried weight. "Because silence only works until someone demands you break it. Yesterday, you demanded." Briggs's jaw tightened. Shame still clung to him. "I was out of line, I thought you were less, and I wanted the others to laugh." She glanced at him, steady. "And did they?" He nodded once, curt. "They did." "And then they didn't," she said. For a moment, the two of them walked in silence, only the desert wind between them. Briggs finally said, "You've put me in a position I can't undo. I mocked you. You proved me wrong. Now every soldier on this base is looking at both of us differently. You changed more than you think." She didn't answer. Her uncle's warning echoed again. Once they see, they never stop looking. By the end of that week, the range had turned into something else entirely. Soldiers lingered after training, hopping to catch sight of her calculations, the way she tested wind, the way she shouldered a rifle as if it had always been part of her. Some brought questions. Others brought challenges thinly disguised as curiosity. Could you do it again? What about in different wind conditions? Think you could hit a moving target that far? She deflected most with silence, a shake of the head, a glance that warned them not to mistake her for entertainment. But silence didn't stop the legend from growing. One evening, a group of junior snipers huddled in the mess argued over her shot. Harris, who had once sneered the loudest, now grew defensive. I was there. I saw it. Dead center. Don't call it luck. Another scoffed. Anyone can get lucky once, physics or not. Briggs, seated nearby, slammed his cup down hard enough to rattle the table. Enough. It wasn't luck. And until one of you replicates it, you don't get to argue otherwise. The room fell quiet, stunned. For the first time, Briggs's authority carried no arrogance, only respect. Alina overheard but didn't intervene. She didn't need to. Yet privately, she wrestled with what she had invited. Alone at night, her bunk cold and narrow, she stared at the ceiling and asked questions she couldn't silence. What did it mean to be seen now? To no longer vanish in the corners of the base? To carry the weight of expectation she had never asked for? There was pride in her chest, yes, but pride carried a shadow, the fear that what had happened once might be demanded again. That failure, inevitable someday, would undo the respect she had barely touched. Her uncle's lessons hadn't prepared her for this. He had taught her physics, patience, the language of wind. He hadn't taught her how to live with people starring. Weeks passed. The commendation was approved. Orders arrived. She would leave Ravenwood for advanced sniper school. Briggs met her before dawn the day she shipped out. He looked older in that light, stripped of swagger. I'll say this once, he told her. You made me better, not because of the shot, because you forced me to see what I'd stopped seeing. Talent doesn't wear rank. Sometimes it wears dust and carries a broom. She didn't know what to say, so she only nodded. The bus idled behind her, its engine low and steady. Briggs extended his hand. She shook it once firm and then stepped aboard. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back at the range, the same place where she had been invisible, where laughter had tried to cut her down, where silence had turned into thunder. The flag still whipped in the wind, careless of what had happened. The desert carried no memory, only people did. And already they were remembering differently. Why does a legend feel smaller the moment it walks into a new room? Alina arrived at sniper school with her name whispered like rumor. Instructors had read the reports, watched shaky cell phone recordings passed around base to base. Some arrived curious, others doubtful. A few looked at her with open resentment, as if she had cut in line to a place she hadn't earned. The first morning, the commanding instructor, Captain Rourke, addressed the class in clipped tones. I don't care what you've done before. Out here, it doesn't matter. You'll prove yourself again every day. Records don't fire rounds, people do. His gaze lingered on her. A pause, deliberate, as though to remind her that what Ravenwood had witnessed was irrelevant here. She nodded once, offering no defense. The days blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion. Marches with full kit, hours of scope work, calculations under pressure, shooting until her cheek bruised and her shoulder burned. The school was built not to confirm reputations but to break them down, grind them to bone, then see who was left. Alina endured quietly. No complaints, no boasts, but silence had a different weight here. At Ravenwood it had been invisibility. At sniper school, silence was interpreted as arrogance. One evening over rations, a corporal leaned across the table. So what's the secret? The 4,000-meter shot, trick ammo, lucky gust of wind. Don't tell me it was just skill. She kept her eyes on her tray. It was physics. The corporal scoffed. Physics doesn't steady your hand. Physics doesn't stop your pulse from ruining the trigger squeeze. Another soldier chimed in. Come on, Cross. People out there think you're a myth. Don't make us believe it was just chance. Her jaw tightened. Believe what you want. The conversation died, sour. but she felt the weight of their suspicion long after. Training didn't get easier. Spotter drills demanded trust, but trust came hard when classmates carried jealousy in their eyes. During wind calls, they second-guessed her. During ballistic calculations, they rolled their eyes if she solved equations too fast. Still, she kept her posture calm. She let the bitterness wash past, because her uncle's voice whispered, "You can't argue the bullet. The shot is the only language they respect." Weeks in, a field test was announced, simulated engagements across uneven desert terrain. Teams rotated rifles, spotting scopes and range cards. Targets appeared without warning at distances that punished hesitation. Alina was paired with Sergeant Kearns, a man whose reputation leaned more on volume than skill. From the first step, he bristled. "Don't think I'm your spotter," he muttered. "You might have fooled Briggs back at Ravenwood, but here, you're just another trainee." She said nothing. When the first steel plate appeared at 900 meters, Kearns rushed calculations. "Hold 4 mils left, 7 high, take it." She checked the wind flags, the shimmer of heat. He was wrong. "I'll adjust," she said. "You'll do what I tell you." The silence stretched. Then she twisted the turret, following her own math. She fired, impact, dead center. Kearns swore, muttering excuses about wind shifts, but she didn't gloat. She only logged the shot. Target after target, the pattern repeated. His calls were sloppy. Hers were precise. He grew red with anger, but every impact spoke louder than his protests. By dusk, the evaluators had their notes. Kearns walked off stiff, refusing to meet her eyes. She sat on her pack, sweat drying on her neck, and let exhaustion sink into her bones. Later, Captain Rourke approached. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "You made the right calls today. You didn't let ego ruin the shot. That matters here." She looked up at him. "Then why do I feel like it does?" He paused. "Because every myth faces the same trial. Was it real? Was it repeatable? Or was it just one moment in the desert?" Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Because she understood, every day at sniper school was a question mark hung around her neck. The weeks stretched on. Nights in the barracks grew colder, conversations shorter. She wasn't hated outright. She wasn't mocked. But she wasn't embraced either. She was suspended between fear and admiration, a liminal place where no soldier rests comfortably. On a particularly brutal day, the instructors staged a moving target drill. Wind gusts tore across the field, pushing mirages sideways. Soldiers missed one after another, curses echoing. When her turn came, silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to fail. She adjusted, tracked, squeezed. The target jerked under impact. Rourke's whistle cut sharp, hit confirmed. Her classmates shifted uneasily. Some looked impressed, others only more resentful. That night, lying in her bunk, Alina stared into the dark. Was this what being seen meant? To be measured, doubted, feared. To have every success weaponized against your right to belong. She pressed her palms together, breathing steady. The ceiling didn't answer. The desert outside carried no memory, but she carried it. Every silence, every stare. And she wondered, not for the first time, whether the cost of one impossible shot would be worth the life it was building for her now. What does it mean when the first target bleeds? Graduation day came without ceremony. No bands, no cheering families, no banners strung across hangars. At sniper school, the only applause was silence, a name read from a clipboard, an assignment posted on a wall. Alina Cross's name was there, alongside soldiers who had doubted her, measured her, and still stood unable to deny her precision. Captain Rourke shook her hand. His grip was firm, his eyes steady. "You've earned this. Don't let anyone take it from you." She nodded, unsure what this even was. A patch, a reputation, or the weight of carrying a skill that would soon demand more than math and wind calls. Within weeks, she was deployed. Dust and heat followed her again, only this time it was Nevada. It was a foreign desert, sand whipping in currents, villages carved into the landscape like scars. The names of the towns hardly mattered. What mattered was the mission. Her unit operated from a forward operating base stitched together from HESCO barriers and plywood huts. Generators hummed through the night, and the smell of diesel clung to everything. Soldiers moved with a rhythm equal parts routine and exhaustion. Alina was given her place in a sniper-spotter pair, and to her surprise it was Briggs at her side. No longer the arrogant showman of Ravenwood, he carried himself differently now. He didn't question her presence. He didn't smirk. He simply adjusted his spotting scope and said, "We'll make it work." They worked. Days stretched into patrols, overwatch, hours staring through glass at empty horizons. The tension wasn't in pulling the trigger, it was in not pulling it. Waiting. Watching. Knowing that every second carried the possibility of something changing. And then it did. The call came on their second week. Intel suggested a cell of insurgents was setting up along a ridgeline outside the village perimeter, preparing an ambush for a convoy scheduled to pass at dawn. Alina and Briggs were positioned before the sun rose, their hides dug into rocky ground, camouflage netting draped to break their outlines. The desert air was cool, the sky bruised with the first hints of light. Through her scope, Alina saw them. 3 figures moving against the rocks, carrying tubes too long and heavy to be anything but launchers. Their pace was slow, deliberate, confident. They didn't know eyes were on them. Her heart thudded. These weren't steel plates painted orange. These were men, flesh, breath. Briggs's voice cut low. "Range 1100, wind steady, you've got the shot." She tracked the lead figure, crosshairs hovering. Her finger rested near the trigger but didn't touch it yet. Her chest tightened. This was the line her uncle had never spoken about. The line training had avoided with clinical detachment. Physics didn't prepare you for faces, for the truth that steel plates didn't scream, didn't bleed. Briggs's voice came again, sharper. "Cross. They'll be in position in minutes. The convoy has no idea. You take the shot or they walk into an ambush." Her breath trembled, she steadied it. Inhale, exhale, hold. The man in her crosshairs adjusted his launcher, turning slightly. She could see his jaw, the rough stubble, the way his scarf shifted in the breeze, details that anchored him as human. Her finger curled, pressure built. The rifle cracked. Through the scope she saw the impact. The man dropped. The launcher clattered against stone. The others froze, panic rippling into chaos. Briggs called adjustments. Another squeeze, another impact. 2 down, the third scrambled for cover. She shifted, fired. Dust bloomed. The man vanished into a crevice, gone. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The echoes of gunfire seemed to linger longer than they should have. Briggs exhaled hard beside her. "You stopped it. The convoy's safe." She didn't answer. Her hands were steady, but inside everything quaked. She had done what was required. She had done her job, but the image in her scope burned behind her eyelids, the man's scarf lifting in the breeze, the way he fell without ceremony, without sound but the crack of her bullet. They exfiltrated in silence. That night back at the fob, Alina sat on the edge of her bunk. The room was dim, generator hum pressing against the walls. Her rifle leaned against the frame, silent, indifferent. She pressed her palms to her eyes. The image returned, sharper, crueler in the dark. Her uncle's voice rose from memory. "The rifle doesn't care who holds it. The bullet only listens to physics." But her heart whispered a darker truth. Physics doesn't bury the weight. Briggs appeared at the door. He didn't step in, only leaned against the frame. His voice was quiet, stripped of command. "I remember my first," he said. "You'll remember yours too. The face, the way it looked before you fired, the way it didn't look after, it doesn't leave." She lowered her hand slowly, meeting his gaze. He looked older than she remembered, lines cut deep into his face. "How do you live with it?" she asked. He paused, searching for words. You don't, you carry it. And if you're lucky, you make it mean something. A convoy that makes it home. A patrol that doesn't get wiped. That's the only way it balances. She didn't answer. Balance felt like a fragile word for something so heavy. But when she lay down that night, sleep did not come. The desert outside was silent, but inside her chest, echoes lived on louder than any rifle's report. And she knew this truth now. Steel targets made you a marksman. Human ones made you something else entirely, something harder to name, something harder to survive. How many times can you pull the trigger before the echo stops sounding like yourself? Weeks turned into months. Missions blurred into each other. Alina's name began to circulate not just inside her unit, but across the forward operating bases scattered across the desert. Soldiers who had never met her knew her reputation, the woman who could reach farther than the rest, the one who could see physics where others saw only distance. Her calls saved patrols. Convoys returned whole because she noticed shapes in the mirage that others would have dismissed. She became the one cleared for shots no one else wanted, the specialist tapped when ranges stretched beyond belief. But the more she succeeded, the less she slept. Every night in the small, dim bunk, the faces lined up. Not their names, she never knew those. Just fragments, a scarf shifting in the wind, eyes narrowing against glare, the sudden collapse of a body cut by velocity. She tried to bury them under numbers, calculations, the language of ballistics, but numbers had no weight compared to memory. Briggs watched her change. They spent long hours side by side in hides, silence broken only by wind calls and the soft scrape of adjustments. He spoke less now, his arrogance long gone. He had seen too much himself. One evening, as they lay prone overlooking a wadi where movement had been reported, Briggs broke the stillness. "You're quieter than you used to be." She kept her eye in the scope, tracking nothing but shifting sand. "There's less worth saying." He grunted. "That's how it starts. You stop talking, you think it makes it easier, but silence doesn't carry it away, it just traps it closer." Her jaw tightened. "What else am I supposed to do?" He didn't answer, he didn't have to. She knew he carried his own ghosts. Another mission, another ridge. Intel flagged a sniper working against their patrols, disciplined, patient, precise. Counter-sniping was a chess game with rifles, and Alina was the piece they trusted to play it. They waited for hours, sun crawling across the sky. Briggs scanned with his scope, eyes narrowed. "There," he whispered finally, a flicker of movement, almost nothing, a glint where no glint should be. She adjusted. The distance was brutal, over 2,000 meters, crosswinds cutting unpredictably. Her tablet spat numbers, her notebook confirmed. She dialed, adjusted, steadied. For long seconds the world shrank to her crosshairs and a shimmer of stone. Then a blur of fabric, the faint outline of a rifle. A man like her, prone, watching, waiting. Her finger tightened. The crack split the silence, seconds stretched, impact. The figure jerked, rifle sliding lifeless. Briggs exhaled. "You just outweighted a ghost." She lowered her head briefly to the ground, not in triumph, in fatigue. Another face added to the ledger she could never balance. Back at the FOB, the story spread. Soldiers praised her. Officers quoted her patience in debriefs. Snipers in training whispered her name like she was already myth. But Alina avoided the mess hall whenever she could. Praise turned her stomach now, because praise came from those who didn't see the scarf in the breeze, the eyes in the scope, the humanity erased by calculation. One night she sat outside the wire, where the desert stretched endless under starlight. Briggs found her there, rifle leaning against her shoulder. "You're unraveling," he said simply. She didn't deny it. "How many can you carry before it breaks you?" His silence stretched long. Finally, he said, "All of them. You carry all of them, but you don't carry them for yourself. You carry them for the ones who made it home because you fired." Her throat tightened. "That doesn't erase them." "No," he admitted, "it never does." The desert wind cut across their faces, cool under the moon. She whispered almost to herself, "Sometimes I wonder if the bullet is the easy part. The waiting, the silence, the math, that's simple. But the memory is what kills slow." Briggs didn't answer. He only sat beside her, the two of them staring into the dark, listening to the silence between stars. Over time, missions carved lines deeper into her. She still hit her shots. She still saved lives. But her smile, faint as it once was, vanished entirely. She carried herself like a shadow, efficient, precise, but hollowed in ways no commendation could fill. At sniper school, they had taught her patience. In combat, she learned patience had a price. The longer you waited, the more time you had to think about who you were about to end. One evening, after a long-range interdiction that halted an incoming mortar team, Briggs watched her pack her gear. He said quietly, "You know what makes you dangerous, Cross? Not the math, not the steadiness. It's that you still care." She froze, hands tightening on the rifle case. He continued, "Most of us learn not to. We bury it so deep we don't feel anything anymore. That's how we survive. But you still care. That's what makes you good. And that's what's going to break you if you're not careful." She didn't answer, but his words stayed, long after the night missions, long after the shots, long after the faces. Because caring was both the gift and the wound, and she had no way to turn it off. What happens when the impossible shot isn't for pride, but survival? The orders came without ceremony. Intelligence suggested an enemy commander, the architect of repeated ambushes and bombings, would move through a valley 2 nights from now. His presence was rare, his capture unlikely. The only chance was elimination. The problem, distance. The valley stretched wide, winds swirling between jagged cliffs. The only vantage point safe enough for overwatch was nearly 3 kilometers away. For most, impossible. For Alina, it was simply math wrapped in consequence. She studied the maps in silence. Briggs stood over her shoulder, watching. "They want you," he said quietly. She nodded, not with pride, not with excitement, only with the inevitability of someone who had already understood what being seen meant, expectation without escape. They hiked under cover of darkness, gear heavy on their backs, boots grinding against stone. The night smelled of dust and oil. The silence was sharp, broken only by distant echoes of conflict they couldn't see. By dawn they were in position. Hidden among the rocks, camo netting stretched, rifles mounted, optics scanning. Alina pressed her cheek into the stock, scope sweeping across the valley. Villagers moved below, small dots carrying water, tending animals. Then a convoy, not military, not armored. A cluster of trucks, worn and dented, grinding along the rough path. And in the back of one, half shielded by tarps, a man surrounded by guards. The commander. Briggs confirmed through his spotting scope. "That's him. Range 2800. Crosswinds inconsistent, 7 to 12 knots. Mirage unstable. This is yours." Her tablet came alive under her fingers. Data poured in: distance, angle, elevation, wind shift. She compared, recalculated, checked again. Numbers meant clarity. Numbers steadied her breath. But when she looked back through the scope, numbers blurred against the reality of faces. Guards joked. A boy too young, maybe 15, clung to the side of the truck, eyes scanning the horizon not for snipers but for work. Her throat tightened. The shot wasn't a plate. It wasn't even the scarf in the wind from before. It was men who hadn't chosen where to stand. It was a boy who would fall into grief before he knew how to carry it. "Cross," Briggs said. His voice was calm but urgent. "This convoy makes it through, more of ours die. You know that." She breathed in, out. The weight pressed heavier than her rifle. Her uncle's voice came back. "The bullet only listens to physics." Her own whispered answer followed. "But the soul listens to memory." She adjusted turrets, windage precise, elevation exact. She waited for the lull in the breeze, the second when the valley stilled. Her finger curled. The crack split the dawn. Through the scope, she watched 7 seconds stretch into forever. The bullet crossed distance, bent by wind, pulled by gravity. Then impact. The commander jerked, collapsed. Guards scattered, shouting, weapons raised to an enemy they couldn't see. Chaos rippled through the valley. Briggs called it, confirmed, target neutralized. But Alina didn't move. Her eye stayed in the scope, watching the boy leap from the truck, scrambling to his fallen commander's side. She couldn't hear his voice, but she could see his mouth, open wide, screaming soundless grief into the desert. Her chest clenched. The rifle felt heavier than stone. Briggs touched her shoulder. "We move now." They packed in silence, retreating through the rocks, exfiltration sharp and methodical. But inside her head, nothing was methodical. The boy's face looped, the scream she couldn't hear louder than gunfire. Back at the FOB, the mission was hailed as a success. Commanders praised her precision. Lives were saved, they said. Operation secured. The unit intact. Alina sat alone that night, cleaning her rifle. The rag moved steady, barrel gleamed, but her reflection in the steel looked fractured. Briggs entered quietly, setting his own gear aside. He didn't speak at first. When he did, his voice was heavy. "You saved them today, don't forget that." She kept polishing, "And I broke someone else." He sighed. "That's the balance, always the balance." Her hands stilled on the rifle. What if balance isn't real? What if it's just what we tell ourselves to keep pulling the trigger? Briggs didn't answer. His silence was its own truth. When he left, she set the rifle down carefully. For the first time, she stared at it not as a tool, not as physics, but as the bridge between survival and memory, a bridge she had to walk, but one that never carried her back whole. She lay down, sleep miles away, and as her eyes closed, she didn't see the commander. She saw the boy, always the boy. What happens when the war ends, but the silence does? Alina returned stateside with no fanfare. Planes touched down. Bags clattered. Boots scraped against hangar floors. Families cheered and cried, but for her, no one waited. She walked through the noise as if it belonged to another world. The commendations came in manila folders, crisp signatures stamped on paper. They used words like precision, valor, decisive action. None of them used the word that lived in her chest: wait. At Ravenwood, where it had begun, she stood once more on the range. Soldiers who had once laughed now nodded with quiet respect. Some stopped her, asking questions about wind calls, mirage, drop charts. She answered softly, sparingly. One young private asked the question no one else dared. "What's it like making a shot that far, that kind of impossible?" She held his gaze for a moment. Her answer was not what he expected. "It's not the distance that stays with you. It's what waits at the end of it." He blinked, unsure how to respond. She walked away before he could. The bucket of brass casing still sat in the corner of the storage shed, dusty, forgotten. She touched the rim with her fingers, remembering the clink of each one, the way the world had dismissed her as background noise. That morning had felt like a lifetime ago, though the echo of it still shaped her days. Now she lived in two worlds. In one, she was a legend. The woman who made the 4,000-meter shot, who neutralized the enemy sniper, who dropped a commander in the valley. Soldiers whispered her name in awe. In the other world, the private one, she was a ledger of faces she could not erase. A scarf in the wind, eyes narrowing against glare. A boy screaming soundlessly in her scope. She learned to carry it the way Briggs had said, not erasing, not balancing, just carrying. But some nights, the weight pressed so deep it was hard to breathe. Briggs visited her sometimes, long after deployment. They sat on the range in silence, side by side, watching the flags whip against the Nevada wind. He didn't lecture anymore. He didn't pretend the burden was lighter than it was. They were simply two soldiers who had seen too much, sharing silence as if it were the only language that didn't lie. You know, Briggs said one evening, I used to think the job was about hitting the shot, proving you could do what no one else could, but it's not. The job about carrying the cost when you do. She nodded, and what if the cost is too high? He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. Then you remember who you saved, because that's the only answer that lets you keep going. She turned her face toward the horizon. The sun bled orange into the desert, the same color as the target she had hit years before, the shot that had shattered laughter into silence. That day had rewritten her future, but it had also chained her to a path she hadn't chosen. And yet she didn't regret it. Not fully. Because the truth was simple. Every convoy that returned, every patrol that lived, every soldier who walked through another day owed a piece of their survival to a shot she had taken. The rifle leaned against her leg, heavy as always, but it was no longer just a weapon. It was a reminder of what dignity looked like, not loud, not demanding, but steady, silent. Later, alone, she wrote a note in the back of her notebook, the one stained with years of calculations. Not for anyone else, for herself. Extraordinary moments don't ask permission. They find you when you're unseen, when you're underestimated. And when they come, you don't rise because you want to. You rise because silence has lasted long enough. She closed the book and set it aside. The desert wind rattled against the windows, restless, endless. And somewhere deep inside, she understood the truth that had carried her through every shot, every silence, every weight she bore. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.